Check one. Not sure if this is working yet, so I just did this a way more complicated way than normal. But as many of you know, I am a enemy of the state according to YouTube, and so what ended up happening is I had to come running back to Facebook, and now for slight efficiency purposes, I streamed into Jerome's group, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, and it's been a really good experience doing that, and highly recommend Jerome's channel to anyone who sees this, because this is also being recorded, and that's where the complication comes in. And then the recorded version is going to YouTube, and we'll see what happens. Because, as I mentioned, the whole refugee factor. There's been news in the Iran's communities on Reddit and Facebook, and also my own hypotheses in my own brain. Before we get into the news aspect of things, I don't want this stream to become a thing where it's like 45 minutes is dedicated to Tony Reid or more, because I like 122675, and it's been a very, very good podcast, and it's very riveting. But that doesn't mean that the people who make good content can't also be a little bit overly ambitious in their... Now, I'm not saying that the news that you're going to hear about today is overly ambitious, but I just want you guys to remember that Tony Reid thinks that D'Angelo was the Zodiac Killer. And I was going to do a whole thing about this for people lately, but I've gone over it before, and it's a major task, and because I just don't think he was, it'd be like spending, a great period of time preparing something that you don't even think is worth debunking. So what's the point? But there are elements of both of these crime sprees that I would think pretty thoroughly rule out, or otherwise suggest against that being the case. So, let's see here. Paul, you guys notice there's a new sign on the stream that says Waterboard Joe D'Angelo before it's too late. The whole bit about campaign being paid for is taken out, and it's also in black and yellow instead of red and white, just because it looks a little better. But I also took the Paul Holes part out for a couple reasons. One is that Paul Holes and I are not running for office together. It's just satire, and so I don't want it to get misinterpreted by... Because some people on the internet just take everything way too seriously. And I don't know what kind of a guy Paul Holes really is, aside from capturing terrorists, which is very admirable. But the other reason is that sometimes he just tells stories that it's like, did that really happen? And this is exactly where we're going to segue into what we're talking about today. Because for years, Paul Holes was on the television and everywhere else, and he was like, oh, Greg Sanchez beat the crap out of Joe D'Angelo, and there was a huge fight, and D'Angelo was severely shaken up by this terrible battle to the death with Greg Sanchez. And there were people... I just bought that line of the narrative 100%. I didn't even question. I was like, oh, yeah, so he got in a fight with Greg Sanchez. Okay, got it. And that's kind of the danger of, like, if you're a guy like Paul Holt, you have to be really careful about what you're telling people happened for sure. Because Paul Holes is a very credible person. When you almost... Okay, I shouldn't say that. It's not true single-handedly. When you are the driving force behind implementation of the technology that successfully apprehends a terrorist that everyone has been looking for God knows how long, 40 years or whatever, and you get it done, you're in a position of great responsibility and intellectual authority within that community and within other circles too, for basically forever. And even if you say crazy stuff, someone will write it off somewhere and be like, yeah, but Paul Holes, and he'd be like, hey, wait a minute, and it won't matter. So you have to be really careful. Now, it would be different completely if, and this may be the case, and law enforcement always says hold back, we don't have. So that's why, again, Waterboard Joe D'Angelo is on the screen. But if there was defensive wounds on Sanchez or something that indicate that he hit D'Angelo or that there actually was a conflict between them, then that's one thing. But I'm going to go over a case hypothesis with you guys, and it's just basically in note form, but I can kind of elaborate as I go, about what happened that night. And I think this version of events makes a lot more sense than the one that Paul Holes tells us happened. Okay. It says, alteration of the Holes theory. Did Sanchez really fight D'Angelo? Prowling reports from Queen Anne Lane and Toltec Way. To give some background, and this is the kind of place and channel. Let me make sure everything's going well over here. This is the kind of place and channel where it would greatly benefit people to first read about or learn about the Greg Sanchez Sanchez-Domingo crime, and then listen to this, because if you don't know the details of that crime, it will be hard to understand what the hell I'm talking about. But if you first know at least a little bit of background, it will be possible to understand things without much elaboration, because there's not very much we know. But there are some prowling reports from Goleta that night, is basically a bullet point of it. A guy with shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair was seen on the street over from Domingo's house. And then he was walking a dog. There's all this stuff about prowling, and I think there were other burglaries even in the neighborhood. Anyway. So Junk Food Joey, the original Night Stalker, gains access to 449 Toltec Way via a bathroom window. The way that the house is set up is that there is a bathroom that connects to the room where Sanchez and Domingo were, and that bathroom has a window, and the window is close enough to the door that if you can go through that window or reach through the window, you can't fit through it, but if you can reach through that window, you can unlock the bathroom door leading outside, and then you can enter the bathroom through that door and then enter the master bedroom through the bathroom, okay? Reaching in through that window, Joey unlocks the bathroom door, which leads outside. No scraping sound is heard. So this is the first narrative thing I had to dispel in order to come to what I think is a more accurate understanding of what went on. Supposedly, that door that leads outside from the bathroom scrapes on carpet when you open it. And this has been claimed by responders, investigators, blah, blah, blah. That may be true. But at the same time, it has also been told that that scraping sound was had the effect of waking up people inside the house, hypothetically. But um, that becomes very problematic for at least one of these scenarios that I'm going to go over, and one of them I think is I mean, they're both just as likely because we don't know what happened, but one of them I kind of like more just because it's like a little more elaborate and there's a clever explanation for the imprints in the bathroom, but it doesn't mean it's any more likely. Sanchez and Domingo are either fast asleep or engaged in other activities. So the first scenario is that Joey stands in the bathroom for a long period of time, leaving behind the deep impressions in the carpet. So the first situation lays out that those impressions are immediately deposited there at the beginning of his entrance, going forward a couple hours. Okay. The attack commences. So he comes out of the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no scraping sound. Maybe there's a scraping sound, but I don't think it wakes up anyone. And I don't think anyone hears it. All right. Scenario 2, that this is the one that I like more, but we don't know what happened. Joey emerges rather quickly from the bathroom. So as soon as he gets in, he comes in there. Sanchez and Domingo are either already awake or Joey initiates the usual flashlight number to awaken the victims. I lean towards flashlight, and we'll talk about why too. But this is basically, that's the MO. That's the way that it always happened in all these invasions, is that the flashlight was, sometimes he'd tap on door frames or whatever, but ultimately there was always a flashlight. Or he'd tap on a bed or something, but there's a flashlight. He doesn't get a chance to bind either of them because Sanchez immediately begins to stand up or roll out of the bed towards the flashlight, calling the bluff of the man shining it at him. So immediately, because the reason that we know that is because Sanchez wasn't bound, as far as is discernible at this time. And so now Domingo was, but so people say, well, Domingo was bound first. Not true, because the ONSMO was to have the female bind the male first, then approach and bind. So if Domingo's bound but Sanchez is not, then something else happened here that isn't. The MO was thrown off as far as the sequence of the bindings. Sanchez was never bound. That means, and D'Angelo would have got him restrained as quickly as possible. He's a huge guy. He's like 6'4", 6'7", whatever the heck it was. I can't remember. But he's huge. So D'Angelo would have immediately would have wanted him restrained. The fact that he wasn't means that as soon as he woke them up, Sanchez went for the light, I think. A single gunshot rings out, and the round strikes Sanchez in the cheek. He stumbles towards the closet, attempting to brace himself at the closet pole. It collapses, and he falls in pain, bleeding profusely. So, how did he get in the closet? Well, remember, if he has a flashlight, you can't see anything, basically. And there is a significant disorientation that's going to occur when first, was it 38 or something? A 38 goes off next to you. 2, that round hits you in the face. And 3, there's a light. It's the same situation as like Michael Mageau, except Mageau didn't have room to stumble chaotically. He was inside of a car. But Sanchez probably just immediately went towards that closet, maybe stunned, disoriented, and as a result, temporarily blinded with assistance from the flashlight. So, scenario 2 from that point that gunshot rings out is that ONS immediately begins a vicious assault with the lawn plugger, beating Sanchez approximately 24 times in the back of the head. I think that this happened quickly because the large number of strikes indicates adrenaline, and it indicates fear. So for the ONS, as soon as this all happens, one of his greatest fears is that he's lost control of yet another Goleta crime scene, because every time he's gone to Goleta and every time he goes to Goleta, he loses control to some degree of that crime scene. So he's done this before numerous times, and so as a result of that, he responds with incredible, overwhelming, deadly force in the Sanchez-Domingo affair, because he's not having that anymore. And by that time, he'd lost control of Goleta 1, he'd lost control of Offerman Manning and Goleta, and then now this is happening, and he's already getting older. So you can see that blitzkrieg of fear and anger. So this must have happened basically as soon as that gunshot went out. And remember that he has a flashlight, so he can see. He's much more situationally aware of the circumstances going on in that room with the light than anyone could have been. So you'll notice in that description of events that at no point is there a melee between Sanchez and D'Angelo. Stunned from the sudden and overwhelming rapid use of chaotic deadly force, Domingo has not resisted. So people know fight, flight, and freeze, whatever. There was really nowhere to go inside there. And obviously, if Sherry Domingo is there, she knows very few options besides just freeze. So I don't think that it matters whether or not she's been restrained yet. He then restrains the second victim at the scene and then kills her. Not with gunfire, but with the lawn plugger. Now, knowing that a single gunshot, while it did possibly alert neighbors to a conflict, can only be reliably traced with additional gunfire. So imagine you're in a neighborhood at night, it's 3:30 in the morning or something, and you hear a single gunshot from a house. As long as you don't hear more, or as long as you don't see the commotion or whatever's going on inside the house from outside, it's going to be very, very difficult to then determine where that came from, then call the police and have them respond to the correct location. I don't think we know about any dispatch calls from Goleta that night about the gunfire. It's possible, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody knows, but mostly that's irrelevant because it was one gunshot. And so very, very hard to decide where that came from if you're a witness, and in the moment especially. And he knows from Offerman Manning not to unleash a volley of gunfire, because although it didn't get him apprehended and it didn't appear to cause any complications to his escape, it probably scared him to know that he had just fired 5 rounds off of the Super Bell, or 6 rounds, whatever it was, in that revolver. If he remains quiet and still, Joey can avoid being seen by curious observers who may have heard commotion. So ONS just waits in that room in darkness. He goes into the bathroom where he stands for a few hours in silence. Probably so that he can, 1, look outside from that bathroom, from inside the darkness, and then 2, so he's as far away from kind of making, I'm not sure exactly why, but it appears that this is why I like this scenario more, because it's more, and that doesn't mean it's true, guys, but in terms of a colorful or interesting explanation for how those imprints got in that bathroom, maybe he was just standing there waiting it out because he had just fired the gun. So that's just made up. It's hypothetical completely. But it's either that or he was lying in wait in that bathroom. But I don't think the scraping sound has anything to do with what happened, and I don't think that he got into a fist fight with Greg Sanchez, because that would have killed him, I think. Before exiting, he alters the crime scene by smearing blood all over the walls leading to the front door, but then probably exits via the bathroom door. Goleta law enforcement was unable to gather useful evidence from these supposedly natural smears by the offender during his exit. So they found in who's it? Santa Barbara Sheriff or something was responding to this. They found like blood streaks and smears all over the walls leading from the room where they were killed to the front door. But it's interesting if you read some of the statements by, no, I don't know if they're official statements or they're just interviews in the media, but from the years following this event, there were investigators who thought that this offender was law enforcement because everything that he did left no forensic evidence, like except for the semen stain that ultimately links him to this crime. But as far as the blood smears and stuff going down the hallway, they weren't able to pull fingerprints from that, and they weren't able to do anything with it. So it looks like maybe artificially crafted smears. Now you might be wondering why. He does this to mislead investigators as to what time he may have exited the house. By this time, in scenario 2, saying he's stood in the bathroom for however long, or whatever, through the darkness, or even maybe before, because the murder happened so late that unless he exits like immediately, which maybe, it might be almost light or getting light by the time he leaves, and that might actually serve you as advantage, because if he's just walking out of a house in light time, it's like whatever. It doesn't look suspicious, as long as you're not seen by too many people. So he's probably leaving in the early morning. Remember that pants were stolen from the crime scene, and maybe a shirt, I'm not sure, but clothing was stolen from the crime scene, and the hanger was found in the trash for that. So probably what happened is he changed into clothes with no blood on him and then just walked out, whatever exit, and I think it would have been the back, but we're going to use some Google Earth things to look at that. Later maybe, or now, I'm not sure. So by leaving smears all over the walls, ONS has created the illusion that he departed in the darkness, unable to see his way to the front door. So everybody's going, well, didn't anyone see someone walk out of their house on Toltec Way in the middle of the night? And no, because he either didn't walk out of Toltec Way, instead the next street over, which is a common ONS technique, is to leave through the backyard, go over the backyard of the house behind it, and then exit on their street, or he exited on Toltec Way in the early morning hours in clean clothing. Now, Google Earth would there's a couple of factors that are going to decide which way I think he left the house, because if the neighbors, if the house behind 449 Toltec Way, first of all, I think I've looked at satellites and I think there is such a connection between those two houses, but if the people who lived in that house behind 449 Toltec Way were awake, or were talked to in canvassing, and they say, "Oh well, we were in our backyard," then that would rule out the possibility that he went through that way for me, or at least suggest against it. But I haven't seen that, and I know that there's a very common ONS technique of going between backyards, and I think that Toltec Way was one of those houses where it was so configured you could do that, and I think if Junk Food Joey went to the trouble of selecting a target house that had that capacity, that he would have used that capacity as he always did, and it's just a matter of what brings less possible complication to him. Is leaving through the front door and onto the street of the murder victim, or is it leaving through the back way, exiting from a completely different house onto a different street? That one makes more tactical sense. Otherwise, blah blah blah. We just talked about that. Okay, there's some info I put about here about why Sanchez was shot that way. But basically it comes down to he was really afraid of hesitating at this point. It's just that simple. He almost never hesitated anyway, but actually at Goleta 1 he did majorly, because the intended male victim confronted him and stood up out of the bed, and a lot of people say, well, that didn't happen, that attack is made up. Okay, but scent tracking dogs did track the ONS scent signature away from the crime scene. And two, anyway, there were burglaries. There was all sorts of stuff in Goleta 1 where, guys like Jack Gray who were like, that didn't happen. It's like, okay. And then, remember, the masked sketch that comes from... Oh, I'm thinking of Danville. Anyway. Oh, yeah. It's fine. I'm thinking of Danville. That attack did happen too. But Goleta 1 is different. Goleta 1 is a Stan Lowe's chase. And so that happened for sure. What I meant to say this entire time was Danville. He had so many losses of control at crime scenes, so hopefully that clears up any confusion. People listening like, what the fuck is he talking about? Different events. But he was at both of them, and both of them he screwed up. But in Danville is where the guy got right in his face, and I don't think he was going to let that happen ever again. He almost did the very next time, and so then by Offerman Manning he's had it, and then by Offerman Manning he's learned how to have had it, or by Domingo Sanchez. So Sanchez probably did not make it out of the bed very far. The blood recovered from the floor at the foot of the bed, and the downward trajectory of the bullet demonstrates that Sanchez was mid-roll out of the bed when he was immediately shot at close range, non-fatal, in the head. The instant that he even began to move, I think... I'd be there soon. The instant that this guy began to get out of the bed, Joey just probably shot him. Because, yeah, on Jerome's group. You can't hear you. Yeah, it's being recorded for YouTube, and then the stream is going to just stay in the... Because I can do both at the same time, supposedly. The instant that he goes to move or flinch or do anything, I think ONS just shoots him right away. So there's no melee, there's no battle between them. This wound was either more debilitating than is commonly believed, or the bludgeoning began almost immediately. I mentioned the flashlight thing, that because he had a flashlight, he's able to see everything going on. He's able to acquire targets and stuff in that room, and he would not have retained control of that flashlight if there was a fist fight battle between him and Sanchez. So that's not happening. If that did happen, he would have lost control of that flashlight. He probably would have been killed. So I don't think he was even going to let that get close to that happening. And as soon as anybody flinched, gunfire rang out. Okay, so that runs through the summary of notes of that, my hypothetical of what I think happened there. And that being said, we can go to Tony Reid. Because Tony Reid posted this article on Mother Jones. It says, evidence in her brutal 1979 rape pointing to the Golden State Killer. The police did ... And then his little post says, hiding in plain sight. So, now, I'm not saying that this didn't happen. And we'll talk about why it's controversial. It may very well have happened, but Tony Reid will immediately go, oh, it happened. And now, there's some research. I'm not bagging on him too heavily. He's looked into it. But how strong are his indicators? And there's a overwhelming chance that he's correct even. But before we can just start altering the official lists, and so anyway, my comment to this article was, I wouldn't mind taking a look at the geographics and the finer details of the location of this possible unreported 1979 Sac area attack, although it's very possible D'Angelo was still engaging in textbook full-scale EAR activity in Sac in late 79. We must also remember there is a possibility and... What the hell? What? Oh, I know why. possibility and potential for copycat attacks by this time, as EAR is at the height of his infamy. The deciding factor is going to be one, geographics and locations, potential for tactical approach and operation. So see the Irvine video on this channel. This is a very elaborate aspect of modus operandi that is covered there. So if that exists in this scene, then that's very, very powerful. And Tony Reid writes that off, but I don't think that he has the same level of understanding of like how important that is. It's a battlefield environment that you're looking at these locations through the eyes of basically a quasi special operations, tactical elite commando that D'Angelo considered himself. So these locations are like battlefields, and there will be elements of those battlefields that are very recognizable. Go see the Irvine video. Specific nature and details of the essay. So there's a kind of graphic. There's some dialogues, okay, that occurred between Irons and survivors who talked about them to the police and to other people. And that dialogue is critical and basically will appear in all canonical confirmed EAR crimes. So if you don't have some of the elements of that dialogue, you have an issue. It's up in the air to me until I see some solid proof, as should be anyone's standard for anything in true crime. I could see SAC wanting to sweep copycat attacks under the rug and ignore discussing them just as reasonably as I could see him hushing up D'Angelo's activities. Objectivity is key. Let's take a really close look before we start trying to officially amend the Iran's attack lists. Okay, so Tony Reid comes back, says, to be clear, location is a factor, but it is not determinative. When I say location, I don't mean like specific geographic location. I mean type of location. There's going to be certain features that will basically always be there in an Iran's event. You have a canal or a high. I'm not going to go into it here. Just go through the Irvine. That's what I meant by that. I don't mean that, it happened in Carmichael or whatever. It's fair to say that we've done more mapping and victimology analysis than any other GSK examination. I mean, is that true? Because that could be true, but don't discount like what the other people, because there are a lot of people have done that too. Like law enforcement has, I'm sure, done this. You're talking about the FBI here. Like, I know the FBI. Let's go Department of Justice. You're talking about the Department of Justice. So maybe it's fair to say that, but you don't even know what they've mapped out because it's the government. And then there's people like Quester, and there's people that have been doing so. Just, I think, tone that a little bit. Anyway, that said, this was in Citrus Heights and not in Scottsdale, Arizona, or some other irrelevant location. And that's what I meant by I don't mean that by location. I don't mean it happened in Flagstaff. It happened in, Rancho Cordova, whatever. I mean, is there a canal near her house? Furthermore, copycat cases were eliminated in the same manner as the basic investigation, forensics. Okay, this is why his comment was concerning enough to tell you guys, okay? And disclaimer, I love 122675 podcast. It's a great one. Is everything in there true? Is everything in there D'Angelo? I think, as Tony Reid sees it, yes, I think that. As is objectively true, no, I can't say that. But I do think that Tony Reid believes his own research. So that shows integrity and credibility as a researcher, but it doesn't mean he's always right. Okay. There is absolutely no need to wander around subjective evidence like physical description, victim statements, or MO when there is forensic evidence available. Okay. Now, that could be true. That could be the case. But here comes the sketchy part. Admittedly, the story in Mother Jones does not make this crystal clear, so let's say this clearly and bluntly right here. There were forensic results in this case. Okay. So, because said you wanted to say this clearly and bluntly, I'll really put emphasis that there were forensic results in this case, he says. And I'm sure there were, yeah. What were they? Is my immediate question. But instead of answering that question, the comment takes a different turn. It says D'Angelo's unique serology factors were used in 1979 and earlier to investigate his crimes. It's really that easy. This is the same narrative communicated by Shelby and Crompton. That's also how his identity was confirmed in 2018. His blood factors were the equivalent of 0.1% of the population. When you consider the population of serial offenders, this is a needle in 1,000 haystacks. So that doesn't answer the immediate question that comes to my mind when you say something like there were forensic results in this case. My question does not become, well, what were D'Angelo's serology factors? The question is, what were the forensic results? So we're talking about a specific 1979 Sacramento event. It says there were forensic results during that event. I'm sure there were, as there is when a serious crime like this occurs. But I don't want to know about, yet anyway, I don't need to know immediately about D'Angelo's serology factors. I need to know what were the forensic results in the case. Stand by. All right, so more significantly, the case reports show that Bevins was looking at EAR suspects as the perpetrator in this case. That's something quite powerful that the state did not want to admit here. Those reports also show that the semen evidence was collected and tested. That fact is undisputed by the state. Instead of looking for those results, the state stonewalled the investigation and immediately failed to produce these results despite subpoenas. Looking at this case in the light most favorable to the state, the only thing missing from the file are the test results. Stop. If the test results are missing from the file, then how do we know that those test results indicate that the offender had the same unique serology factors as Joe D'Angelo? I want to really underline what had just happened there. And I think Tony Reid is a lawyer. So, guys, people think, oh, lawyers are sneaky, and yeah, that's probably true. But if you know how to follow along with what they're saying and go, wait a minute, and break everything down as it comes, you can see anomalies where they appear, and I think that this is an anomaly. Because look what happened. Tony Reid says there were forensic results in this case. D'Angelo's serology factors are described. And then it's described that biological material was recovered from the crime. And then it says we're not allowed to see the test results of the biological material. The first thing in there that should be knocked out of relevance temporarily is D'Angelo's serology factors. Because three of these things, well, really, one of these things is not like the other things. We said there were forensic results in this case. The state collected forensic evidence in this case. And 3, the state did not release that forensic evidence in this case. So D'Angelo so far is an outlier in the topics. Because we're talking about this case. So and that's one thing if, okay, the state recovered biological material from this crime, and that biological material showed a 99.9% match to Joe D'Angelo's DNA profile and other biological factors, non-secretor status, etc. So, but that didn't happen. What happened was that biological evidence was collected, and then it wasn't released. So why was D'Angelo brought up yet, Tony Reid? Because we don't have anything so far except for the suspicion that he did this crime that actually links him to the crime scene. Did he do it? Probably. Did it happen? Yeah, probably. But should we rewrite the official lists yet? Let's hold on that one for a second until we can match the serology factors that you say are so unique. And I'm sure they are, because Tony Reid's a very knowledgeable researcher, and if he says something about D'Angelo like that, I mean, it's probably true, and you always fact-check things you hear, but that's probably true. But what is the relevance? So, why is that? Those records were found in every other EAR file when there was forensic evidence. When you look at the 1979 memorandum from Contra Costa Sheriff's Department, the answer becomes clear. Sacramento Sheriff's Department stated that they were actively suppressing the additional attacks. There are others. Okay. That's not how... No, guys. This is the shady... People don't do shady things like this, okay? I can see what you're saying, what you're doing. Why are you doing this, Tony Reid? It's even if you're correct, it's a very disingenuous way of expressing an opinion in a case, because you just tried to do a sneaky thing to make it look like it was the way and it could be that way. But if it is that way, let's just stick with non-sneaky tactics, and so that people aren't like, oh, he's sneaky. Don't be sneaky, guys. There's no reason for that. This doesn't help things. Don't edit the lists by being sneaky, because then it's not true, and then if it's not true crime, or even if it is true, it's lucky that it was true. So just because Sacramento Sheriff said they were suppressing other attacks, very possibly. Why? I mean, not surprising. There was a news blackout for the first 7 attacks on purpose. So we already know that Sacramento operates this way. So yeah, sure, very possibly this is an EAR crime. But he's trying to be sneaky by making it look like the forensic evidence is there, and maybe it is there, but the state refuses to produce it. So we don't know what it says. It could literally be, the forensic evidence in the case could be anything, and we just don't know because they haven't released it to us. So we can't say, oh well, but D'Angelo's serology factors, it's irrelevant. Bottom line, forensic evidence is the kind of objectivity that a court should consider, and that is our focus as well. Is it? Because if it is, then don't misinterpret it. Don't misrepresent it as saying something that it doesn't say because you can't read it, because none of us can read it. If it's your focus to follow the forensic evidence, then don't in the absence of forensic evidence claim that you have an interpretation of that forensic evidence. You don't have it. So that's not cool. That is the required standard of proof. I agree. Totally agree. So why are we saying this is D'Angelo again? Because it could very well be. It probably is. Is it, though? Okay, this is... I wish that Tony Reid would... If Tony Reid operated more like that, it's just automatically you get so much more credibility I consider someone way more of a valid intellectual authority on something if there's a bunch of stuff they don't know and they're open about that, than if they do sneaky stuff to act like they know something they don't know. You don't know what the serology factors of the offender in this Sacramento attack are, because you don't have the forensic evidence. If you just say that, and then you say, but everything else, and that's completely reasonable, like all the circumstantial, all the things that this person claimed that their attacker did inside the house, etc., etc., etc. It all, and I haven't looked at the maps yet because I don't know what the address is, but it all sure sounds like Junk Food Joey. So that's fine to say it looks like Junk Food Joey, but we don't have the forensic evidence. And if we had that, we might be able to confirm that it was Junk Food Joey. But that's not what he's doing. What he's doing is saying there's forensic evidence and then interpreting it, but no one has it. That's not honest. A little bit. Or really black and white, blatantly speaking, it's just not honest to do that. So just correct these things in the record, and it's okay. Maybe he didn't even know what he was doing. Because I understand that a guy like Tony Reid is so ambitious to link things to D'Angelo that he's operating with a tunnel vision just like any human being does when they get into true crime. It's like Don Chaney, and the focus in the spotlight is on Don Chaney. And you frame everything in life in true crime as looking like Don Chaney. It's part of the reason I was joking around a couple years ago about with my felt tip pens putting label maker stickers on them that says "Do not give to Don Chaney." It's like, oh, watch out those felt tip pens, and it comes to your mind that it's Don Chaney, and it's the same thing for Tony Reid and D'Angelo, except not to that extreme. Unsolved homicide, could it be D'Angelo? Sure. Is it? Well, prove it first, because those lists are very serious lists, you guys. Like, it's like canonical Zodiac killings or like canonical Huron situation. Be careful what gets put on that list. It's really, I mean, it has always bothered me. I go to Tom Voigt's website, where I'm banned, so now I can say whatever I want. I go to Tom Voigt's website, and Sherry Jo Bates is listed as a confirmed canonical victim of the Zodiac, and she's not. And so then what does that look like for you as a researcher? It's like, that's so stupid. It's like you're just changing what president was in office in 99 or something. Just new one. Just throw another one there. And then you have to understand that for every other number after that attack, it creates complications in what we're talking about. Because if someone says, oh, it attacked 39, Danville or something, which I think is correct. Attack 39 is a Danville botch attack. Okay, good. Now if I look up Iran's attack 39, I get the same information that that person's trying to convey to me. If I type, but now if we change the list, now if I look up attack 39, it's the next one. So that's Goleta, I guess. And so we shouldn't do that because problems. I think everything that I just told you guys. Well, but it's really simplified here. And I said, I'm completely open to the possibility that non-canonical Iran's attacks may have occurred. That being said, if the medical file is missing from this woman's attack, do we have the data to show that D'Angelo's unique biological signature is in the semen collected at the crime scene? I see you mentioned his serology factor as it was measured at this crime scene, but internal department communications with Contra Costa have no ultimate relevance to what biological evidence was recovered at this crime. So if there's a rumblings of a conspiracy by Sacramento to cover up crimes, and you've uncovered in the WikiLeaks style these evidence of conspiracies and cover-ups, at the end of the day, that has literally no relevance to this non-canonical event unless the non-canonical event is mentioned directly in those communications, and it's not, as far as I know. And so what he's done is he's given you a little information about the non-canonical event and how there's forensics. He's given you a little tidbit of information about D'Angelo. He's given you a little bit of tidbit about conspiracies and sneaky stuff, and then threaded it all together to look like all three things are relevant in this crime. It's very sneaky, guys. That's a very sneaky thing to do, because you can you can look directly at his comment and see what actually happened. What actually happened is that forensic evidence was collected. By the way, did you know that D'Angelo has this serology factor? And then, back to my point, we're not allowed to see that evidence. And so to try to spin that into something where it's like, but his unique serology factor was at that crime scene and Sacramento lied about it. That is so sneaky. The more I break this down for you guys and read this over and really process this, the sneakier that just got. It's a very sneaky thing to do, and I hope that Tony Reid can address that. I think that we finally did it. That's the news for you guys. So, there's other experiments that can be done, like looking on Google Earth to see if that whole Toltec way thing, but that's a story for a whole other day. And realistically, guys, after going to Irvine, for me to give you a crime scene analysis and trajectory of the offender is very difficult. And although it can give you some speculation and opinions about how that went down, there is no replacement for visiting that location in person. And this one is in Goleta, so it's a little far. It's Santa Barbara, which is like up north. So that's going to be not happening during the course of this video, but hopefully someday. There's a lot of these places, and that's why I don't discount what this lady says happened in Sacramento. It's perfectly reasonable to suspect that there's more activity than is accepted or known by the mainstream narrative. But it doesn't mean that everything is just because that. Like Zodiac is a really, really bad one that Tony Reid does. That D'Angelo is the Zodiac killer. That's insane, I think. And while he's a better suspect than Don Chaney, because he's actually a murderer, he's not a good suspect. So, speaking of Don Chaney, if anyone can find out why I was banned from DB Cooper on Reddit, because the comment that I wrote was the most civil, calm, tranquilo fucking comment that anyone's ever made. There's nothing in it that's inflammatory or crazy, and I was banned. And the only reason I think I was banned is because it is a comment that's fairly and rationally critical of a researcher, and I think that researcher was resentful, possibly, or someone aligned with that researcher was resentful, and shut down the comment and banned the account. But if any of you wondering how that has to do with Don Chaney, I think the more the nerdier members of the true crime community will be able to establish those ties. So, going from Don Chaney to D.B. Cooper and who's involved in both. So, that all being said, I really need to clarify, I'm not trashing Tony Reid here. So hopefully he's not watching this and, you son of a bitch, but I'm just illustrating why it's important that we can't try to be sneaky with our stuff. Like, if I give you a case hypothesis on Sanchez-Domingo, like I did at the beginning of this video, then I have to not be sneaky. So this may have happened, not sure what happened, but it could be that, and elaborate on that. So if you think you've identified unsolved crimes that you can link to this dirtbag down here, that should be waterboarded, according to the sign. If you can link an unsolved crime to him, then that's great, because you can solve it that way. But let's be careful about what we're using to link stuff to that, because otherwise it's no different than me saying that this coffee cup proves that Junk Food Joey was the Unabomber. It's not. This is literally the same thing. It's just something that's not true. So, even circumstantially, it's like all the Sacramento attacks, guys, there's no DNA. The only way that we know that it's the same guy is because there's DNA in Contra Costa, and the Contra Costa attacks are so carbon copy identically the same as the Sacramento attacks that it's obvious that it's the same person. There's elements of the MO that were never publicized and that became publicized in later years, or otherwise were determined or derived in later years. And now you have to be insane to say that the Contra Costa attacker is not the Sacramento attacker, because it is. And so people like Drifter, who were like, well, but technically speaking, it's like, yeah, but... So he says MO is like subject, like, yeah, but it's very, very powerful, and it's accepted by courts, and it's studied. Modus operandi is very, very compelling, depending on its how elaborate it is. And we're fortunate because Junk Food Joey had the most elaborate MO of all time. And so when 150 MO factors at a scene are present, and some of them are not known to any other people, then it's very obvious that it's the same person who did that other crime over there with 150 identical MO factors. So it's the same person. But if you have an unsolved crime and you want to link it to Junk Food Joey, you have to have that. And I would accept that if this person's house from this unsolved sack crime, meets all the criteria of the kind of place that Junk Food Joey targeted, and almost without deviation, then that's going to be very, very, very convincing to me. So if this lady's house is second from the corner, one street over from a canal, and the canal leads to another neighborhood that has an exit on the opposite side of town right next to a freeway that goes north, and by the way, all the sidewalks are covered with sycamore trees, like, oh, it's him. Because other offenders are not doing that. It's too... Guys, I went to Irvine, and it's crazy. Go see my wife and I's documentary on Irvine. When you go there in real life, it's like, what the hell? How did he do that? All these little things are like textbook. It would be like if you drew the map on a piece of paper and it was exactly what you wanted it to be, to commit a horrible act of terrorism. And everything is like lined up for it. It's really weird, even down to the smallest details, like Withune and Cruz's houses are the smallest house on that. It's just so weird. All these little tiny things. Or when he exited the Withune crime scene, he did so probably with the advantage of 4 one-way signs, one at each point of transition on his way out of that crime scene. So it's so weird. Now, if I see all of those factors in the Sacramento attack that we're talking about, then that's going to be very, very powerful. So serology factors are irrelevant until we can see the reports, Tony. It's not... You can't go... There's evidence of forensic evidence, but I think... Or there's absence of forensic evidence, but I think if we were allowed to see it, we would find... Like, don't do that. Bye.